Hello again. These days, if people are hearing about climate change, it's usually the bad news. Wildfires in California, hurricanes in the southeast, flooding in the Midwest, drought affecting wildlife and agriculture. Americans are already concerned. In fact, EcoAmerica found in their latest research that over three-quarters of Americans are concerned about climate change. What we need now is to build public support and political will for solutions. This includes getting reliable news on climate change and on solutions. So this session is called Local News, National News, or Easy News. We will discuss the role of the media in the climate movement and what information Americans can trust and practical guidance for moving American society forward on climate solutions. I'm joined today here by three of my esteemed colleagues. Bonnie Schneider, she is a national television meteorologist reporting for the Weather Channel, for MSNBC and CNN. She's also the author of two books on climate change, Taking the Heat and Extreme Weather. Thank you so much for being here, Bonnie.
Thank you, Vanessa, for having me.
Thank you. We also have author and journalist Mark Hertsgaard. He's also the co-founder and executive director of Covering Climate Now. Thank you, Mark.
My pleasure.
And we also have with us Luis Aguirre. He's a news anchor for WPLG Local 10 News Miami and formerly covered entertainment for The Insider. He is a true environmental champion. Thank you, Luis, for being here. Okay.
Unmute myself there.
You're okay.
No, I'm good. Now you can hear me. Thank you for having me, Bonnie.
Wonderful. Thank you for joining us today. So we just got 25 minutes, so let's make the most of it. So the first question is, what do you think is the role of the media in the climate movement? Mark, let's start with you.
Sure. Thank you for having me here today. And I want to salute everybody who is part of this because you are part of the solution. Just like I would say that strong journalism is an essential climate solution. Strong journalism is a catalyst for the kind of progress that is needed on every part of the climate problem, from politics to business, from arts to activism, from individual lifestyle change to policy change and systems change and all of that. Why do I say that? I say that because, as you clearly know by now from these sessions, humanity has to make radical shifts in our economic, our energy, our agricultural systems and practices in the years ahead. And that simply will not happen without the sustained involvement of an informed and engaged citizenry. And that's why climate news is so important. Reliable climate news is very important to building that.
You're absolutely right about that. Bonnie?
Well, I think it's very important and the role of a meteorologist, because as we're covering these major events that are happening globally, whether it's wildfire outbreaks or severe floods, storms, hurricanes, there's often different nuanced connections to climate change. And as extreme weather has become more frequent and more intense over the past several decades, there's more of an opportunity to draw those connections and to explain them to viewers, which is something I try to do while I'm on TV, but especially in my recent book, Taking the Heat, where I write about the connection between climate change and weather and mental and physical health. And that's where I had a chance to really dig into the research to draw those connections. So I think it's important for journalists, meteorologists, for writers to present this science and the findings that they have, but also find a way that it relates to individual people, because the problem of climate change can seem overwhelming. And often some of the younger people, for example, that I interviewed for this book were very pessimistic. And it's a good way to kind of provide people with science and solutions and what they can do individually as well. So there's a larger role and more of an individual role that I think comes into play for journalists and weather people as well.
That's so important to really to connect the dots and make our audience understand that this is the result of what we have been doing, the way that we have been living, and also that there is hope that they can change it also. Luis, what do you think?
I mean, Bonnie and Mark just put it so eloquently, but I just want to piggyback on that and say that our role as journalists is not only to educate, but also to engage, because as Mark and Bonnie both said, this is a solution that involves all of us in real time. And I think that here in South Florida, especially, we're not looking at this 20 or 30 years down the road. We're seeing the fringe effects of climate change right now on our shoreline. We saw the incredible flooding that we had from the storm surge in 2017 from Hurricane Irma. We had 4 blocks in downtown Miami that were just submerged in 4 feet of water. That has never happened before. We have sunny day flooding happening in South Florida all the time with king tides. So this is happening right now in real time. So the solutions are urgent. And I'm fortunate enough that I work for a wonderful television station that last year launched an initiative on Earth Day called Don't Trash Our Treasure, where we highlight environmental issues every single week. I get 4 minutes to talk about protecting our planet, resiliency, making more conscious choices. And what I've seen over the past year is not only the engagement from our viewership, but also the willingness to be part of the solution, asking, what can I do? How can I make changes in my everyday life so that solutions can happen now? I want to protect my planet for my children, for my grandchildren. Kids are recognizing that it's their future they're fighting for. And so this campaign has had tremendous success, and that is the power of local media. I think that people that watch local media see talent as a member of their family. They trust them. There's not that level of spin that we see sometimes from the national media. And I think there seems to be a level of trust with local news personalities that extends beyond what we see on the national front. And the science is very important in this day and age when science is under attack and when facts are under attack. I think it's important to have a voice of trust, a voice of authority, and someone that not only informs but engages the viewership to be a part of the solution.
Yeah, absolutely. And you do such an amazing job at that, Luis. I mean, it's really wonderful, the work that you have done here in Florida. I don't know if that had happened to you, but I have seen in the past couple of years in my reporting in Telemundo that the news about the climate crisis have become a first block story. I mean, is the news of the day. It's not anymore a feature story that we used to do maybe 10 years ago. It's just, this is something that is happening today that is affecting our everyday life. What do you think, Mark?
Well, I think this is exactly right. And I've covered the climate story now for almost 30 years, reporting from 25 countries around the world and much of the United States. And I have to say, for a very long time, being a climate reporter was a pretty lonely profession. There were not many of us on the beat. And that was partly because the gatekeepers in our business, that is to say, the editors-in-chief or in TV or radio, the news managers, were not interested in telling this story. They thought that it was either politically controversial, they were not very aware of what the science said, and above all, they feared that it would drive viewers away, that it was too depressing. And that is why we founded Covering Climate Now 3 years ago. Covering Climate Now has become the biggest media collaboration in the world. We founded it to bring journalists together and newsrooms together. We now have over 500 newsrooms around the world who reach a combined audience of roughly 2 billion people. And we're organized by journalists for journalists. And I'm very happy to say that Telemundo is one of our esteemed partners. And we did that, we founded that organization to break the climate silence that prevailed throughout the media until very recently. And that has changed in the last 3 years, partly because of civic activism, in particular, young Swedish teenager, I'm sure you all know, Greta Thunberg. When she put 6 million people in the streets in the third week of September in 2019, she changed the political calculus, not just of governments, but also of newsrooms. It became a story that newsrooms could no longer avoid. That, as well, of course, as the things that Luis mentioned, you know, you don't have to be a scientist now to know that climate change is happening. All you have to do is look out the window. And science is important, of course, but all of this together has created a situation now where newsrooms are starting to try to catch up. They know that climate change is a story that they must cover now, and they must cover it not just because it's the right thing to do, but because that's how you get an audience. If you want an audience under the age of 40, and let's face it, there's nothing that network television needs more than people under the age of 40 to watch them. You had better be covering the climate story, or else you don't have any credibility. So that's been a really great thing to see in the last 3 years, is the way that the media has stepped up. And all you folks who are out there in the audience, you can help with this. Call your local TV station, your radio station, your local newspaper. Urge them to cover the climate story. Urge them to join Covering Climate Now. We listen to you when the public speaks. Speak out.
Yes, you're absolutely right, Mark. Thank you so much. Luis, I know that this is your passion. I mean, you're a great journalist, but this is something that is really close to your heart. And you mentioned that your station is wonderful and it allows you to have these environmental segments every week. But I'm sure it was not always like this. So what do you think have changed in the past couple of years?
So, well, it just happened a couple of years ago. I came on board after leaving, decided to take a break from entertainment television reporting, and I was very engaged in climate issues when I was working for the Insider. I was fortunate enough to do a couple of shark dives with Discovery for Shark Week and speak about shark conservation on an entertainment show. I mean, go figure. But that really lit me as an activist. And so when I came back to work here in Miami, one of the things that I spoke to my news director about is like, I want to cover climate issues. And he says, okay, go ahead. And there was never really an agenda as to when these reports would happen. But Vanessa, you live here in Miami. You remember in the summer of 2020, in the midst of the pandemic, we had an unprecedented fish kill in the middle of Biscayne Bay. And for years, scientists have been sounding the alarm bell that our bay was at a critical tipping point where it was experiencing a regime change from a seagrass ecosystem to one dominated by algae. And for the first time, we saw 27,000 dead marine species floating in the middle of Biscayne Bay. That's never happened. The first day of the fish kill, I convinced my boss to take me off the anchor desk and let me go live throughout the entire day to report on this, because I knew what the factors were. I mean, I've been talking to the scientists about this. We knew that we were experiencing this incredible deluge of nutrients, deadly nutrients that were just feeding the algae, killing the seagrass, and that we had to mitigate the factors that were bringing all of these deadly nutrients into the bay. And so I went on television after the first report, and I said, this is proof positive that the scientists were right, that our bay is dying. My boss got on the phone. He said, you can't go on TV and tell people the bay is dying. I'm like, but boss, the bay is dying. And I showed him the science. And he's like, I had no idea it was that bad. Get back out there and report on this. I reported on this for 2 weeks. That begat a half-hour special, and that begat this now once weekly report on environmental challenges. So it was because of the fish kill that really lit a fire under not just the news management team here and the editors, but also the community. The community all of a sudden saw with their own eyes, oh my God, we're going to lose everything, because Miami without clean water does not exist. You cannot have Miami without clean water. And that became, I guess, what lit the fuse. And now, as I said earlier, we're now nearing the 1-year anniversary of this series. Has had a tremendous impact, not just in informing our viewers, but getting them engaged and wanting to be part of the solution.
That's an amazing example, and you were so brave. And I have to say that you actually lead the coverage in the fish kill here in Florida, and it was because of you that it really got center stage. So this is a great example of the power of journalism, really. Bonnie, you mentioned that in one of your books you talk about why people get overwhelmed with this information, and I think it has to do with the things that we might think that are too great for us to solve. What advice do you think we journalists should follow in order to communicate this message in a way that people can receive it and can understand that there is a solution and that we can all be part of that solution?
Well, I think, Vanessa, that it's important with weather people, as I was saying, that when we're talking about just covering these events that are happening, is to draw those connections to climate change and also emphasize ways that they can prepare. And part of that is that physical prep. If a hurricane is coming, having your supplies and being ready. But there's also what I found in my research for my book, Taking the Heat, the mental health impacts that climate change is having on so many different ways. For example, that feeling of being overwhelmed, especially affecting young people in terms of eco anxiety. And I devote a chapter in my book to that, talking about how do parents talk to children about their concerns about climate change. And I also interviewed many young people that are experiencing this as well and talked to them about ways they're coping. For example, connecting with nature seems to be something that's been very helpful for them, and finding other like minded people where they can get together and different climate environments, and just to talk about what they're doing to make a difference in their own communities. So that seems to be helping as well. And I would also say that it's important for people to understand that when we do face these natural disasters coming in, whether they're major storms, floodings, that it's not just when the storm is over, the weather report is done, that the story is over. There's a lot of mental health issues that have come up and emotional anguish where people are facing post-traumatic stress even years after a hurricane has passed. And I'm sure the both of you in Florida are well aware of that, where people, anytime they hear a hurricane watch or a hurricane warning, they're on alert. The anxiety comes up, but here we go again. And it's important to address those concerns. And that's something I do in my book. And it's something that I'm working on now with other projects as well, because there really is the physical health and the mental health that's impacted by climate change. And as meteorologists, kind of on the doorstep of that, with talking about different weather events and making those connections, something I found interesting looking at Climate Matters and George Mason University, they had done a study in 2011 of meteorologists just asking them, do they recognize that the climate is changing? And I believe it was about 54% said yes, and that was 2011. And that same question was posed in 2017, and the meteorologist number, wow, went way up to 95%. Saying they recognize the climate is changing. So as time has evolved, we are seeing more people drawing those connections, and we are seeing a greater amount of coverage and mentions of where the climate change interconnects with what we're experiencing weather-wise outside in our own communities.
Wonderful, wonderful, great information. Thank you, Bonnie. Mark, where can we all go for trusted climate information?
That is the question, isn't it? I think it's very important to realize there's a lot of good reporting out there, but there's a lot of garbage as well. And one of the places that you can come is to Covering Climate Now. We have a weekly newsletter, which is free, and we highlight the 6 to 8 best climate stories of every week. And oftentimes, I think that the TV component gets overlooked, but television, folks, remains the single leading news source for most Americans, even in today's digital era. That's still where most people get their news. I want to pick up on something that Louise said. Local TV is the most trusted source. Now, that's the good news. The bad news is not all local TV is at the level that Louise is talking about. So you want to look carefully. I would say that on television in the United States, the PBS NewsHour is probably the best coverage. The BBC internationally is good. The single best place to look for coverage has been for a long time the Guardian newspaper, which again, you can read for free online, although they, of course, encourage you to pay. And just a quick note there, folks, if you want news that you can trust, please help pay for it. We can't do it for free. And you know in life that you get what you pay for. And so often when you pay nothing for news, that's the kind of news that you get. So I would single out the Guardian, also the Washington Post, which in the last 2 years has revolutionized its coverage of climate change. It is now really chasing the Guardian, I think, as the single best source of news in English about this. So those would be 2 places in particular that I would look at. The Washington Post, the Guardian, and as I say, come to Covering Climate Now, and you can get a listing of the best coverage each week of the 6 to 8 stories that are the best. And you know, over time, you'll sort out which are the reliable sources and which are not. And then finally, I would also mention NPR, which is increasing and improving its coverage remarkably also in the last couple of years.
And of course, you can watch Louis at Local 10 News and also Bonnie at CNN and MSNBC and the Weather Channel. They are absolutely trusted sources of information. Louis, so I wanted to ask you, what do you recommend to all the people that are here in this summit? If they want to be part of the solutions, if they want to do something today, what would you say?
Number one, become informed. That is key. I just want to echo what Mark was saying earlier about finding trusted sources of climate news. I think you spot on. The Guardian, the Washington Post, and of course NPR, our local and WLRN does a phenomenal job of covering the climate crisis here in South Florida. But one of the things that we do with Don't Trash Our Treasure is that we highlight local heroes that are out there making a difference. And I think that's really inspired a lot of people to want to mimic that or imitate that and also do their part. And what we try to do is not just present this, oh my God, the sky is falling type scenario, but offer concrete solutions, things that we can do every day, different choices that we can make, become more conscious shoppers, become much more conscious when it comes to buying an automobile, maybe invest in solar panels. We're seeing the effects right now. What are we going to do with Turkey Point? Right now, the American Nuclear Regulatory Commission has decided that maybe it's not such a good idea that we extend the Turkey Point contract for 30 more years to see how climate change, the sea level rise, is going to affect that nuclear plant. So it's not just about presenting the problem, but it's also about showing people that there are everyday people out there right now in current time doing their part, making better choices, being more proactive. And I think by highlighting those stories, this one story comes to mind. A 16-year-old kid from Fort Lauderdale still brings tears to my eyes when I think of it. He was like dedicated his life to going out and collecting mangrove propagules and creating this mangrove nursery in his backyard, and then knocking on the doors of our leaders and saying, hey, I've got these baby mangroves. Let me plant these. The living shoreline is the best defense that we can have. Forget this crazy 20-foot wall the Army Corps of Engineers had proposed to build around the city of Miami. Let's rebuild our shorelines. Let's rebuild our living shorelines. Let's rebuild our coral reefs. That is where the solutions really lie. When you see a 16-year-old taking the bull by the horns and not waiting for the political will to change things, but him fighting for his future, that's what inspires me, and that's what inspires my viewerships. And those are the stories that I like to tell.
Well, you are absolutely right, and I was going to ask you about that. This is a question for the audience, and they wonder what is the most impactful story that you guys have covered lately. That was a wonderful one. Thank you, Luis. Mark, do you remember any stories that have really been impactful for you?
Sure. I think one of the strongest stories is very far away, but it's in Africa. And it shows that even people who are very poor can be climate champions. And it's a story about a man. This ran in my book called Hot, Living Through the Next 50 Years on Earth. And it also was published in Scientific American and overseas in Le Monde. About an elderly farmer in Burkina Faso, who the headline was "The Man Who Stopped the Desert." And this is someone who was changing, some of the poorest people on this planet, he and his other farmers nearby. And they were basically growing trees in their crop fields, not planting them. They're too poor to plant trees. And planting trees does not always work, folks, but growing them, allowing them to grow and sprout turned out to be this amazing climate solution because it helped make the soil easier for the seeds to grow in. It fought against drought because the roots go down, and then when the rain does come, it filters down into the ground rather than flashing off. And of course, also trees yields doubling and tripling, which is great. But what was really exciting about him was that then he went on a kind of almost a missionary tour, and he was spreading this news from farmer to farmer to farmer, and eventually addressed the United Nations and so forth. But the farmer to farmer is part of what matters for this audience. When you talk to people, that is arguably the most important thing you can do about climate change, is to talk to people. Talk to the people you know. Make this a subject Like we're all talking about Ukraine right now. We've all been talking about COVID in the last couple of years. We need to be able to talk about climate in that same way. And we will find that if you start with what you agree with people about, which is the importance of, leaving behind a habitable planet for our kids and things like that, you will find that there's a lot more agreement among the American public than you would perhaps think from some of the national conversations. So talk to one another, and you'll find that will take you far.
You are absolutely right. And the most, in my experience with Planeta, Tierra, Telemundo, is that the most impactful stories are those of individuals that have decided to take a lead and make a difference. And that is inspiring. And that shows us that there is hope and that we can all get involved and actually really be part of the solution. Bonnie, do you remember any stories?
Well, it's interesting listening to everyone. I would say I look at it more from a weather standpoint, and as I did the research for this book, there are different things that we talk about seasonally, let's say. But when it comes to climate change, heat is one of the major factors. A warming planet. What does that mean? And that heat and the science how it affects people really was fascinating for me to kind of dig into in my book. For example, I think that everyone has had the experience of sleeping in a hot room where you don't have air conditioning. And most of the country has air conditioning, but there are many people who don't. And we might think that would only affect certain people in terms of cognition the next day or the ability to sleep and be able to reserve memories. And there was an interesting study that came out of Harvard that I featured in the book where they said, it doesn't matter how old you are, if you're sleeping in a hot room, you're not sleeping well, you're not getting that quality sleep, and that will affect your cognition the next day. So it does make a difference in terms of your ability to store memories and recall things. And in other ways, how does heat affect children? Well, children react to heat differently than adults, and there's been varying degrees of science on how that is explained. And I also investigated in terms of children's sports and how does warming temperatures affect that and their health. So heat kind of wove through many different stories that I had the opportunity to investigate for this book, and also how it affects those that live in cities, the elderly who are more at risk during heat waves, especially if they live, for example, in a building that's not well ventilated and they're on an upper level of that building. Unfortunately, that's where we tend to see a lot of the heat-related deaths, and heat is the number one killer when it comes to extreme weather. So for me, it's many stories that have been woven together by these different meteorological phenomenons, but how climate-induced these disasters have really affected so many people in so many ways, and the opportunity to prepare for them and to be more recognizing that they're happening. And as Mark said, talking to people, and that also means talking to doctors and health experts. And for example, if you're someone that notices, my allergies are starting earlier than they normally do, does that have anything to do with the climate? That's a valid question to ask your doctor or to look into. So I would say that people shouldn't be afraid to bring up these questions to people in the media or anyone. As Mark said, that there's a lot more common thought than we realize. That a lot of people are wondering these things and want to talk about it.
Well, thank you so much. It's so fascinating for me as a journalist to hear you speak, and so inspiring to see that so many of you are doing such a great work. Thank you so much, Luis, Bonnie, and Mark. Thank you for joining us today, and thank you for bringing light on the state of climate news and providing us with practical guidance that we can use ourselves, and also for the wonderful job that you are doing in spreading this important message. Thank you for being with us.
Thanks for having us.
Great to see you all. Okay, so next up, we're going to be talking about...
Hi, I'm Deanna Cohen, co-founder and CEO of Plastic Pollution Coalition, where stopping the crisis of plastic pollution is a national priority. Plastic Pollution Coalition is a global alliance of more than 1,200 organizations, businesses, and thought leaders in 75 countries working toward a more just, equitable world free of plastic pollution and its toxic impact on humans, animals, waterways, the ocean, and the environment. We've pioneered awareness, messaging, and solutions to plastic pollution for 12 years. Whether you are an advocate, policymaker, business leader, student, or concerned individual, you can take action to stop plastic pollution. You can work with us towards a plastic pollution-free America and a plastic pollution-free planet. Visit us at plasticpollutioncoalition.org to learn more, to support our work, and to join our global coalition. Thank you.